Can you believe it? There's just 3 weeks left to go in your fantasy football season. But if you've checked out of 2024, don't worry. At the end of this episode, we've got some black book gold for you to get through. If you are still actively focused on 2024, we're going to talk about the hot and cold players you should be trading in and out, where it's worth getting a 23rd option, and the blessing and the curse of luxury trades. Hey, it's MJ from the Coaches Panel. Welcome back to another of our AFL Fantasy Strategy Roundtables, where we aim to help you in these very last few weeks of your 2024 fantasy season. Joining me on this episode, he's a part of the Coaches Panel, AFL Fantasy Fanatics, and who knows, maybe he'll even start his own thing at this rate. Pick up a third one. Hey, Jordox, nice to see you, mate, and up and about in the final 3 weeks of AFL Fantasy, I said.
Yeah, g'day, mate. Good to be on. It's a very strange time of year where a lot of people are sort of giving up on the season in terms of overalls, and then, it's my not favourite, but the most nerve-wracking time of the year for me, and that's the Dream Team Finals. So for those in leagues, we had the first finals last week, and if you're lucky enough, you got a win, you got a week off, which I got. So nice to just be able to exhale for another week and a bit.
It's helpful for coaches in that position, isn't it, that have that extra league. It really gives you in AFL Fantasy 2 trades this week to position yourself for those final 2 weeks, whether it be that bank yourself a little bit of cash or force a player out of your team that you probably would normally keep, but you've got the opportunity to hit that eject button that little bit earlier. As everything, there's risks associated with every single trade we make. And maybe we should start there, Jordox. Luxury trade can almost be a curse sometimes. Much like if you've nailed the perfect starting squad and you get into the round 1 trades, it's like, oh, geez, what can I do? You can sometimes unintentionally end up tinkering with something and blowing your team up. Social media is full at the moment of people just venting their frustration, moving off of a player, thinking it's going to go perfect. I'm finally off a guy that's had a bad 3 weeks, 5 weeks, bad matchup, whatever it is. How do you help coaches that have luxury trades see them miss a 50 to 100 point swing in a weekend? Is it just part of the luck of AFL Fantasy, or is there a little bit more science and strategy we could apply to it?
Yeah, it's a bit of both. It is ultimately luck. You see a lot of the ones flying around on the socials. The trades in the moment made sense. And we're at that, as you said, that tricky part of year where it's luxury trades, but it's anxiety trades, I call them, because, you think you're doing something good for your team, but trading out a guy like... So Luke Ryan is a classic one. And I guess my experience with that could be, it's been very common for those that trade him out. But all the reasons you traded that player out are still there. 1 week doesn't change the reason you did that. It hurts because you see you've cost yourself some points. But, someone like a Luke Ryan could very well just go back to another 60 this week and you'll be glad to have traded him. Sometimes the trades we made, we don't feel or get the fruits of them until a week or two down the track.
Yeah. And
this has been a really hard year to pick these, I think, for a couple of reasons. One, I feel like our teams have come together quicker this year, whether that's from the strength of the cash cows, the overall skills of the community, thanks to all the podcasts and content that's out there. I feel like it's never been more competitive. And then the fact that, trends are great, but there's always anomalies. And, a couple of weeks ago, Treloar was coming off a big score and he was a real hot target, but he's playing Sydney in Sydney, so let's just avoid him. He comes out and has 40 touches. We're seeing it so often. So I guess the advice would be, don't be scared because one of your trades cost you points. Just if you were using the logic and part of your reasoning is sound and you backed yourself in, just go forth with it. Don't beat yourself up because, you might have cost yourself 20, 30 points this week just gone. Who knows? The next 3 weeks, you may have gained 100 points overall.
Luke Ryan's that fascinating one too, because on paper, his form was putrid. We knew Pierce was out of the side, and those two things, whether it's causation or correlation, were meaning a significant scoring decline. But the matchup was really, really favourable for general defenders and intercepting defenders. And so then you're stuck with that dilemma that you've highlighted. Do I back in the fixture and hope that the scoring trend goes against form and fixture is rewarded? Or do I stay with form, ignore the fixture, and then as a result kind of move forward? And it's in those instances I kind of go, well, what's the lesser of two evils I'm happier to sit with? Am I happier to jump off a guy that form-wise has frustrated me and he gets the 110, he gets the 120, he gets the 130, and I lose 50 points? Am I happy with that output? Or am I happy to hold, bank the fixture, and then have the inverse of it, which is I continue on with the poor format and get what I'd presumed? For me, that kind of helps me make that determining factor is what it is, and then what's the output of who I'm getting into. You put those elements together, and that gives me that level of clarity to go, right, should I stay with form, or should I let fixture be the leader when you're getting off an out-of-form player coming into an in-form fixture matchup? And really, that's what luxury trading is for us at this point of the year, isn't it? It's trying to get off guys that form or fixture say we should jump off, and we'll talk about some players that sit in that category in a moment, and then leapfrog into players that fixture probably indicates is good. And, an example of one not quite working was Noah Anderson. For many in the community, he was the must-get premium midfielder because he had 4 great matchups for inside mids, and he still went 90-odd, so I don't think you can be disappointed by it. And certainly if you put a captaincy on a Cherry or a Bontempelli, you weren't looking at that with the Friday night matchup, but we had 5 or 6 other options really pop for us over the weekend, so I don't think too many people were caught out. But that's that point that you're highlighting, isn't it? Is there fixtures, documentation, trends? We've got to factor all these things in, and then at the end of the day, there's just that element and elegant piece.
I'll give you another example from the weekend. Not a lot of people still have Brodie Grundy, but I do. And he was on the chopping block for a Marshall or a Cherry this week. But they were playing Port Adelaide, who has Sweet, who's been quite a favourable matchup for most rucks. So yes. I thought, no, I'll hold Grundy one more. And then there was a late change. Peter Laddams came in. I mean, you just can't forecast that sort of stuff. So, and even with Laddams, I thought, no, Grundy will be fine. And it was an 84, pretty disappointing. So Grundy to Marshall would have given me 50 points. Instead, I did Ryan to Stewart, which cost me 15 points or 18 points. So
yeah, you roll it up and you're 70 points worse off. Yeah.
But my reasoning was sound, and I backed myself with that. Correct. So it is where it is.
Yeah, and I think that's ultimately the important thing is if your logic's flawed as a result, take the lesson, take the point hit, move forward into next week and ultimately into 2025, you take the learnings. But if your logic is sound, it holds that water test, okay, that's the things that kind of don't land your way. I think that's a really fair outcome. Let's talk about the 23rd option. I know we've labelled them the 23rd premium at some point in times. I've not been a huge fan of that tactic. It's a little more of a dream team or super coach prominent output. But I'm redefining as the 23rd option specifically in at the forward line. The reason being, it's the line that we've got the lowest threshold of scoring for someone to get to before we kind of go, you know what, I'm taking it. If you get a 95 in your backline, mids or rucks, doesn't matter who's that emergency option, you're just probably not taking it unless you're still for some bizarre reason running a rookie. You're just not taking it. Whereas in the forward line, man, even popping an 80 or an 85, you're going, geez, I might take
hard to say no to that.
And so I want to spend a little bit. It really is. So we know there's been the big 4 forwards, 3 for the front half of the year, and then Caldwell has added himself to the Flanders, Heaney, and Zorko train. Then you've got a bunch of other names that sit in at F5. You could probably throw Simpkin into that mix, Dylan Moore into that mix as 2 of the more popular names. Jackson up until last week, I think owners would have been relatively happy to still hold him to some element and degree. But F6 still continues to provide this option for us to look at looping scoring. And there's some players I want to throw out to you and get your thoughts on them. So you've got a couple of the rookies that have been mostly still performing close enough to an F6 option in Manor and Dowling. Dowling's probably topped out now, but Manor's still on his day going 80, even hit the ton. So he's sitting in there. Peatling is another one that is there. Now, there's a Cornelio test for the weekend, and when Cornelio is available, as well as a full scope of their midfield, Peatling's role suffers. Sometimes so does his selection. Then you've got some other guys that you could really put in the mix. Simpkin, we've alluded to as a name that can float in and out of that spot. Philippou, I know some people jumped into last week off the back. In essence, the F6 spot is where we can really look to be creative with looping and where the timing of fixtures is ultimately a lead indicator of who should go on and off. But what's your take of this 23rd option with 3 weeks left to go? Is almost this a better strategic play rather than getting cute with a fixture analysis and doing these luxury trades that can just as easily burn us?
I like it. You've got to be really switched on to pull it off. You've got to be across things on the weekend. If you're the sort of player who really does just like to set their team and forget over the weekend, that's fine. I don't think you can really compete at the top end playing the game that way with the subs and the rolling lockouts and etc. So you need to be across it. You need to know when everyone's playing and be prepared to do it. But I think it's a viable option for sure. I don't think I've ever seen a year where there's been more of a call out to do this. Sometimes, deep in the year, it can be a little bit pretty playing a loophole style. But I think it's almost a necessity. There's not an F6, maybe Jai Simpkin, but there's not an F6 that anyone could, say, all right, I'm happy, done with that. Let's look at the midfield. Let's look at the ruck line, whatever it is. I think we're constantly looking at that spot. So if you can find someone and you can make it happen, there's some great names. I mean, you mentioned a few. We've got Tom Powell back in the conversation, which will probably be painful for those who traded him out months ago when he was...
What's that, back-to-back tons now?
Scores.
Yeah.
And, Zach Fish is a test. I think he could impact his role a bit. And then, you know who's coming in this week? I mean, you'll know. We'll both know who he is. But Isaac Rankin's back this week. It would be a brave call to jump into him. But, geez, if you're looking for a guy, forget your F6, F7. If you're looking for, a legitimate F5, F6 to just put on the field and forget about it, the way he was playing before his suspension, he was the man. So, what is he, 779? It's pretty cheap. I wouldn't mind having a look at that. Plays the last game of the round, though. So make of that what you will.
But again, that could be a really favourable selection. That's where you use fixtures to your advantage. You were talking about being switched on if you're playing the 23rd option. For some, for example, it might be you've got a Simpkin, Powell, or a Peatling. Well, they're playing at the same time this weekend. So that 23rd option's not in play for you this weekend. But if you're going for rankings or a league focus, it's a little harder in leagues to get full indication of what your opponent's doing because it's only once the traded in player is in, do you really see the movement hit the league matchup. So it's harder to track as it can be towards other formats as much. But if you're behind and you're getting to Sunday and you're going, geez, I need a surge of points here. I need to find some separation of a player that could pop me a 110, 120, 130. And while it's more out of the ordinary scope of what Rankin can do, he's also that type of player. And we're using him as an illustration, not the defining point, but going, what can I do? Who's available on that Sunday? And I'm going to wait and save my trades for that last moment, hit the eject button, and I'm going to go for it. So I think you're right. Maximizing how the timing of these fixtures, maybe as you're listening to this or watching this, and if you are, hi, the fixture's already out. It comes out Wednesday morning. and we'll have some time of understanding what round 24 is. Again, it's just maximizing and utilizing all these little intricate, nuanced details to just give you that slight competitive edge. And that's all it takes. You mentioned for you, like, if you had that visibility of Grundy knowing that Laddams was in, well, you might not have pulled the trigger on that trade that you did had you either seen, known, or had the option of making the trades in and around that time. And so it's these little incremental things that unfortunately are defining seasons right now. That's all it takes, is someone getting stuck on the wrong side of the ground where the ball is there, it's benched, they spend 5 minutes longer off the ground than they normally would. All of a sudden, it's a little bit wet and slippery when it's normally not. A new player pops into the... Literally, this is what is defining our seasons now in AFL Fantasy, isn't it, Jordox?
Or we have a team who's sitting first on the ladder, albeit not in great form, who gets smacked by 112 points, which hasn't happened in the AFL era, just quietly, 100 points to the top side. Last time it happened was in 1983. So
someone's done his homework.
Yeah, just wanted to slip that one in there. So weird stuff happens all the time in footy, and it's probably why those who know me know I'm not as big on the fixture and you know who's playing who. He has the good matchup, he has the bad matchup. Like, I use it in my decision making, but you know some people really look to it as if it's set in stone. It's not. I mean, a player in good form can certainly be in bad form, and a team in great form. Sydney was such a hard matchup. Now they're, you know, I won't say easy, but I'm sure the fantasy points against them in the last month has gone up. So, yeah, it's hard to pick it.
Yeah, it really is. In a few minutes, I do want to talk Black Book for 2025. We're not going to give too much away, but I do want you to just give me maybe a name or two, again, for coaches that are like, I'm kind of done with 2024. I'm out of my finals. Rankings was dead and buried either a week or a month or most of the year, however you'd like to view it. We still are going to do this over these final 3 weeks of the season. Every single week, we'll give you one new player from the Coaches Panel Black Book to just mark the name down. Some might be easy for you. Others might be a little curveball for you. So that's coming for you in the next few minutes. Before that, though, we've just talked about players with scoring trends, fixtures, and we're making moves right now to jump off of players that, for a number of variables, we want to get out of: form, fixture, changes in structure, new coach, injuries, whatever it is, and players that we are wanting to trade into because fixture's good, form is good, newfound role, whatever it actually is. I want to go, let's pick one player per line that if you were making a trade this week, you would say, I'm getting off them. And then we'll do the opposite of that. We'll talk about a player that you're like, yeah, I want to get into. Now, the only caveat I'll say for the into option, as we kind of set the scene, is it's for this week, but you want to be content to hold them for the final 3 weeks. It's not like it's a 1 week matchup and then you're like, that's it, I'm off. I have no plan or desire to do it. You hope to maybe be able to do that, but you don't want to go into a player that you go, an example, I'm trading into Jack Darling, who's going to pop another 120. Gosh, I never saw that coming, by the way. And then it's like, impressive. I'm jumping off. It was impressive. And well done to the people that put him in their daily fantasy or their AFL fantasy draft league. May have played against someone that done that, the punk. So I'm not bitter about it at all. Can you tell? It's in my voice. Can you tell? A little bit. And so that's kind of the guide. And so while it might be more a leaning indicator of this week is the week to jump on, we really are saying these guys are, they're okay to hold on to for the rest of the year if you get stuck. Let's talk about the cold players. We've each got one, a player. Who's the defender that if you had the option to jump off this week, you'd be jumping off, Jordox?
I'm not the first to bring up this name this week, but Nick Martin, I think for most of the year we've seen him flip from different roles across the field, but he's mostly been able to keep his scoring output regardless of position. And I think we're just starting to see that trail off now. So he's had 1 ton in his last 7. he's had no kick-ins at all since round 17. So I don't mind him up the ground and even playing a bit forward because he kicks goals and does well. But I don't know, just the last few weeks, his scoring's starting to dry right up. So I don't know how much is he be? I've got it up here actually. 8.75. So he's a good price if you did trade him out.
There's money there. You could pretty much get to anyone really.
And there's options. Like we are not short of options in the back line. So it's a bit of a risky one because he could go and drop a 130 on our heads and none of us would be all that surprised. But
no.
Yeah, he's just one who's trending down and no kick-ins since round 17. That was the stat that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, I think that's a fair shout too. And it sits in that luxury trade space too, doesn't it? But form, role, variance and uncertainty. We'll talk about some hot players to trade into in a moment. But gosh, if you don't have the Whitfield types or the Sheasel types that are taking matchups and rankings away from you, well, it does get hard to go, well, man, this is my ticket off this guy to someone that's going to pop.
So they are still missing Ridley, but Xavier Dersman's hurt, which is such a shame. He's having a good year, 3 to 4 weeks for him. So that might mean they need Martin out on the wing and not off half back. So I don't know. We'll wait and see.
Yeah, it's tough. Dersman scored okay off the wing for us too. So again, it's that tough spot with versatility while great in a football sense. From a fantasy perspective, well, we can see some high flux and deviation through there. If I was jumping off one defender this week, we've already mentioned his name. It's Luke Ryan. I'd happily trade out of Luke. I was on the side of the fixture would have given me, if I was the owner, confidence to hold. But it's very easy to say that objectively when you're not copying the 60s and 70s and 80s that he's been dishing up over the last 5 weeks, but still 21% owned. The reason I'd be jumping off Luke Ryan is he's got a horrible 3 matchups to come, like Geelong, GWS, Port Adelaide. For a player that sits in his position, these are not favourable matchups at all. I think it's the Bulldogs and West Coast. Defenders have worse runs than what Luke Ryan has. A bit different for the Freo inside mids, but for their defenders and interceptors, this is not a good time. And he's popped, what is it, 1 good score over the last 5 weeks or so, Luke Ryan. So I'd happily move off Luke if I had that option. Let's move into the midfield. Jordox, if you're moving off a midfielder this week, who is it and why?
Well, this guy has the second best 5-round average for all mids, and I would still suggest trading him out.
Spicy. I like it. Who is it?
It's not that spicy. So Lockie Neal, he's been in great form, but he comes up against the Giants and Toby Bedford, who did a strangulation job on Will Day on the weekend. One of the best tags we've seen of the year. Day was on, I think he was on 8 at halftime. So
yeah, single digits.
I wasn't watching
it wasn't
closely.
pretty.
Yeah, no. And look, I'm sure there are other factors at play. But if we know one thing to be true about Lockie Neal, he can drop a 50 or a 60 when copping a tag. So I reckon this would be the week to jump off. Or, as is the flavour of the week, if you've got 23 primos, maybe you could loop Lockie Neal. Plays the first game. There's 2 first games, but he plays the first fixture on Saturday. So it's an early fixture. Maybe if you've got another mid or a defender or someone you can roll up, you could, loop Lockie this week.
I love that take. Not too many people would have the courage to do that. The last 3, the last 5 would be the indicator. But you're right. Toby Bedford is taking premium midfielders to town at the moment. And previous eras, we've seen taggers become absolute kryptonite. Bedford's building that resume, that it's a fixture we want to find a way to get out of. So I think it's a good shout. For me, while we're talking about team leaders and club leaders, the premium mid I'd look to get out, Jordan Dawson. I'd be looking to jump off of him. An average of 92 in his last 5. I know he popped a ton last week and did start to spend a little bit of time behind the ball. But with Rankin coming back into that midfield, the Crows seemingly happy to give Matt Crouch opportunities. Saligos continue to standing up. I just don't think he's going to be in and around that midfield unit as much. And then if he's in that spot, it's a rubbish matchup. And then if he's in the defensive kind of intercepting spot, it's a rubbish matchup too. Like Dogs, Port and Swans are not favourable matchups, whichever way you want to look at it. So to me, at 820, it's not great value there, but he's just not been, much like the Crows, not been what we think they would have been this year. So I'd happily jump off Jordan Dawson if I could.
He looks banged up to me, Dawes. I think he's carried a lot this year, and I mean, geez, I wouldn't be surprised if they even cotton wooled him, in a week or two, maybe after the showdown. He does love a showdown, but no, I do agree with that one.
He's definitely a showdown specialist, that's for sure. All right, let's head to the rucks. There's limited options for us, so there's a high probability of doubling up. Who's the ruck that if you could trade him out, I think I might know where you're going just based on the way you were lamenting earlier, but who's the ruckman you'd be looking to move out if you had the desire and luxury of trading out a ruckman?
Yeah. And most likely that's what I'll be doing. But yeah, Brodie Grundy, he's had a solid year. And, in other years, he maybe talked up a bit more, but we are seeing some insane numbers from our rucks this year. So he just hasn't quite been in that top echelon. Has been great, but look at the numbers. He hasn't gone over, I think it was 110 in 6 rounds. And John Longmire last week, I saw an interview or a presser or something. He actually flagged a potential rest coming up for Grundy. Now, they've got the bye before finals. We know that, but it just, I don't know, it just made me think time to get off. And that's why I was going to, but then he had the Port matchup. But anyway, so no surprises there. Grundy, time to go, big fella.
Oh, what, 1 ton in his last 3 going on 89. Only one favourable matchup in his next 3. Like, I'm 100% with you. Like, there's really only 5 or 6 rucks that we're really talking that people have. It's English, it's Gawn, it's Marshall, it's Grundy, it's Cherry. Like, it's this kind of combo of 5 that most classic owners are rolling with a combination of. I just don't think of all of them, like, Grundy's the one that's the most urgent to jump off. So, yeah, I'm with you. I'm not even going to add another name to that. I think you're spot on the money with that. What about forwards, though? You've already given us one spicy take. You've said the number 2 ranked forward over a midfielder over the last 5 weeks. You flagged the tag, and that's why you're jumping off, not because of form, but because of opponent that is coming. Are you going spicy again in the forward lines, or are we going a little bit lemon and herb with the decision here?
I think it's got to be spicy. I mean, how can you suggest trading anyone out in the forward line when we have no idea who the heck to bring in? But as per the exercise requested of me, I did land on Isaac Heaney, who's been a star this year. But since his suspension, full spice. I got a bit behind it. There's a bit behind the spice. So since his suspension, he's averaging just 84, which isn't terrible by any stretch. However, that is down 20 points on his season average. Now, in that time, Sydney have dropped right off. They're averaging 7.5 goals a game in that time. So they need goals, MJ. Who's good at kicking goals? One of their best forwards of the last 5-6 years, Isaac Heaney. Papley's injured. I can see a world where they need to inject Heaney back into that forward line. They've got Luke Parker, itching to play 4 quarters. They're playing him a sub. They're going to give him 4 quarters eventually. Callum Mills is 2-3 weeks back in now. He's going to start seeing more midfield time. I can see Heaney going forward. Do I actually genuinely recommend trading him out? Probably not, because he's one of the only good ones. No, I know.
That's right.
But I think he's going to finish, pretty average. And then I had another theory, which was more tongue-in-cheek, but ever since he was made ineligible for the Brownlow, he's just said, oh, what's the point then?
Just voted in. Look, it would take a brave coach to do it. That is for sure. But it is if the guy you got on the other side was popping 90s and 100s and we're all being suckers
Rankin?
just playing the conservative game,
Rankin's,
copping the 70 and 80s.
Rankin's been sitting for 4 weeks, fit as a fiddle, itching to get out there. He could be something this week. Yeah, maybe Heaney to Rankin could be on the cards. Anyway, who's yours?
Goodness. I'm not doing it, but knock yourself out. I'm going to go more lemon and herb because I'm not trading out Heaney, although I love the spice around that. I'm going for a guy that's in 24% of teams and not in any of them that are highly ranked, I would presume, especially now after dishing up a mid-40s score last week. Luke Jackson. Yeah, I'm half cheating. I'm picking a ruck and I'm picking a forward, but he's averaging 71 with Darcy in the side, and that's actually slightly inflated because there was one game Darcy got subbed out around quarter time, and Jackson went on to ton. So his truer North scoring now is about 60s with Darcy. He's gone 95 without him in the 8 games. So we know it's a very chalk and cheese approach, but if you're a Jackson owner, like he's now under 700K, unless you got another 100, 200K you can find elsewhere, you're swimming in a territory that you don't like, which is what most F6 are. There might be some cheap options that we'll get to in a moment as we talk about hot forwards we want to trade into. But politely, I want no part of Luke Jackson. And I think the 24% of coaches that are still there are finding ways to get him out of their side very quickly. So I'm cheating because I'm picking 2 positions in one and probably going for something that's very palatable to swallow. So nice and easy to balance out the spiciness you're giving us, Jordox. Well, let's go the other direction then, mate. Shall we? We've given 8 players, well, 7 actually, because we both went for Grundy. 7 players that we'd say if you could get off this guy this week, fixture, form, and a combination of variables would say now's a really good time. Let's go the opposite end. If you're trading into a player, these would be the players we would say, yes, we want in on them this week. Who's your defender? If you could trade into any defender this week, who are you going and why?
I found someone who, it's not a surprising name, but the more I looked at this guy, the more I started to shift what my trades might be this week because I actually really want this guy now.
Okay.
So it's Jack Sinclair. 5 tons in his last 6. Excellent. Loves Marvel Stadium. 8 of his 10 games this year at Marvel are tons. One of the 2 where he missed the ton, 99. I wanted to just put that in and say it was a ton, but it's technically not. So 8 tons are 99 out of his 10 games this year at Marvel. He's kind of playing, I mean, I'm not watching Secure closely, but I feel like he's playing the Tom Stewart role where he's getting CBAs, but he's also getting kick-ins.
And then coming back.
And he's also possessing the ball with the +6s. It's really the perfect role. And Tom Stewart's doing a great job of it. And I think Jack Sinclair's even better at it because he's been doing it for longer and he gets to play at Marvel every week for the rest of the year. And I think he's under 900K. Yeah, I've certainly sold him to me. I'll be trying to find a way to get him this week.
Geez, it's hard to ignore. Again, just based on ownership percentage in the sort of the top 1%, the top 100, Whitfield, Dacos, Sheasel are 3 highly popular prospects. So we've kind of, now that I've heard yours, I know we've all ventured away from them basically on the premise that, like we have with the Mega 4 forwards, in the same vein of chances are you've probably got them anyway. So we're trying to, while not go unique for unique's sake, give you a name that if you are trading is something you're less likely to have. I like that you've gone and done something about a ground because that's what I've got with my defender too. What you want to get in the defensive line, it's almost like the defensive premiums have transported themselves to what we used to believe a midfield premium was over previous years, which is we felt like we could get the most bankable 120s. And for me, I'm giving you a guy who's had 2 140-plus scores this year. And the last 2 times this player has played at the MCG, he has scored those 140s. Guess where he's playing this week? He's playing at the MCG. Now, the opponent's not favourable, but the venue is. Talking about Nick Newman. 872k. Like if there's any defender that you would say, give me 3 defenders that could pop a 140 on any given week against almost anybody, who are you saying? I think right now we would say Whitfield has got to be in that conversation. It'd be a hard argument to say Cheesel's not a consideration for that. And while Dacos has been very, very good, those monster ceilings aren't there. Martin, you alluded to, the monster ceilings aren't there. I think Newman's right on that podium consideration, and Sinclair, to be fair, belongs in that conversation too. But to me, man, you want a ceiling guy that could pop your 140 and surge you over the top of that league or rankings focus. To me, yeah, the Hawks aren't great, but after that, by the way, Eagles and the Saints. So if you're happy to run a gauntlet and hope the venue's favourable, I like a bit of Nick Newman action this week. Let's head into the mids. Jordox, who's your mid? I feel like, I don't know if I'm getting spicy. I feel like you've spiced out on me here right now, but anything's possible. Who's the midfielder that you'd say, if I could get anyone, I'd be jumping on this bloke this week?
Nah, it's pretty vanilla. It's Marcus Bontempelli. So, you know, he's pretty commonly owned anyway, and he's had a funny year. You know, if you've owned him, you would say he's had a disappointing year because there's been some lows. As someone who hasn't owned him in any comps, he's been terrifying because any given week he can just go bang, like he did on the weekend on 62 at quarter time. Are you kidding me? That is just absurd. Anyway, let's have a look at him. So I think personally he's chasing a Brownlow. I'm not suggesting that's his motivation. The Dogs are clearly charging for what would be a very unlikely premiership. I think most in the footy community would love to see Bont win a Brownlow. I think he's going to be bloody close, and he's got a few weeks to just clinch it. Now, his next 2 grounds, so grounds are sort of my theme at the moment. He goes Adelaide Oval Adelaide Oval into 2 games at Marvel. So Marvel, like the Saints, like Sinclair, he loves Marvel. He's averaging 111 at Marvel, and that includes a game which was so bad he scored a 53. So in that average was a 53. I tried to find a way to remove it to pad the stats, but he just had an off game. It wasn't an injury game. Now, he's played at Adelaide Oval twice this year. Once in Gather Round, where he scored 149, and then the other time against Port, where he scored a flat ton. So his next few weeks are looking very promising, and he's at 919k, so not a bad price. And anyone who could score 60 points in a quarter has got to be considered. So, yeah, I'm tipping Bont to have a really big finish.
I like the Bont shout. At any given week, he feels like your safe C, doesn't he? And the beauty of him being a ride at the end of the round, you take that gauntlet run of a VC, and barring, I think, maybe 2 or 3 exceptions over the last 100 games, he's gone under 80. So he is as dependable as it comes for being at least a decent captaincy option, let alone, as you've mentioned, at any given moment, he could pop a 140 weekend, which he's done a number of times throughout this season. For me in the midfield, it's not quite vanilla, but it's close. Andrew Brayshaw for me at 930k. He's got an average of 114 over his last 3. This next 2 weeks is really pretty good. If I could get it off by round 24, it absolutely would. But really, since the bye, he's in absolute ripping nick, and he comes up against Geelong this week, which is still such a favourable scoring matchup for us for inside mids and for a player of his capacity that can run, find space, get some easy marks, uncontested possessions, and turn them into just combinations of +3s to +6s to +5s, depending on what you need. So to me, Andy Brayshaw has been a bit roller coastery at starts of the season, and while he still drops the odd 80 or 90, I'm pretty confident against Geelong this week. He's gone 115 plus in my eyes, so I'd happily get on for this fixture this week. Let's look at the rucks. I think we could be probably talking about down to 2 options. Let's see if we've split the marbles here or if we've all loaded in on the one player. Who's the ruck you'd be trading into this week, Jordox, if you could?
Oh, look, I really struggled to go past Sherry, but looking at the fixture, you know, Rowan Marshall, he's got the Tigers, the Cats, and the Blues. So that's Nank, who just does his own thing and lets his opposition do the same. Geelong, who's just Stanley. Maybe they'll drop Stanley again and get De Koning back in. And then Carlton, who are without
Same outcome.
De Koning and have, Pitnet, he's not too bad. But, it's hard to go past Marshall. All 3 games at Marvel. But I do think we need to mention Sherry. Well, who'd you go with? Because if it's,
for me, it was Romar. Just the fact that this week, there's 150 on the cards for this matchup, given how he plays, how he scores, what he's doing at Marvel, just the ability of what this Tigers team is allowing teams to do at the moment. Like, St Kilda could absolutely have a field day for Romar this week. So, Cherry deserves all the flowers in the world. I'm going early. I'm dubbing him the MVP of 2024 based on scoring output, what you paid for at his price, and what he's delivered for you across the year, including some vice-captaincy and captaincy scores in a challenging part of the season, which he's done really over the last month. Like, I don't know who you could argue has been more important to our teams this year. Like, Gawn pre-injury, sure. Yeah, go. I'm keen.
Oh, I was going to say we could save it for a later pod, but no, I reckon Lockie Whitfield will be pretty close to that for the price you paid. Remember, he was underpriced start of the year, and since the middle part of the year, he has just been so good. And I guess why I kind of went to him is if you didn't have Cherry, but you had Marshall or Gawn,
sure,
you'd kind of be in a similar spot. I can't think of another defender that's done what Whitfield's done, but take nothing away from Sherry. I think we are witnessing something pretty special here. I think he's going to be the best fantasy ruck for the next 6-7 years at least, and it starts next year. Or maybe it's even this year. Well, he could still catch Marshall.
Yeah, he very well could. I was chatting with one of our fellow panelists, Kane, because what we do for our Patreons, and if you're not a Patreon yet, the details are in the description of this episode to become one. If you join, even at that cash cow tier of $2 a month during the off-season, in the months of October and November, we deliver to you a weekly episode where we look through the top 50 keeper prospects to go and own. We break them out into tiers. We put the players in those areas, and then we unpack why we've got them there. We've already had some stern discussions, me and Kane. He'll be back for that season. Don't you worry about that. About, putting a ruck ahead of Cherry in a keeper league, it's a hard case to mount. It's not insurmountable, but it is a hard case to mount to not say that Tristan Cherry is the top ruck prospect in a keeper league. And as you've mentioned, he could be it already for us in Classic for AFL Fantasy this year. So I think it's a fair shout. Maybe we will have a little bit more of a deeper dive on the MVPs a little bit later, because I'm still pretty bullish on Cherry. I think Whitfield's a decent shout. I think Zorko, if you started with him and there was a rarefied air, he would have put you right, hot in contention. Max Holmes has flown under the radar. I don't think he's at the same standard and level, but you got him as a mid-range sort of 700k mid. He's now turned to a high 90s averaging mid defender. So they're not up at Cherry numbers. Flanders,
he's done the job. What's so interesting about every name, every candidate, not a single pure mid. It has not been a year for the pure mids.
It's not like they've all had 3 or 4 weeks where they've been really strong, but then they've all dished up multiple weeks in the 80s or below. So even a Bontempelli, who we thought was bulletproof, he's still, you mentioned that 50, he's had the 80s. Goulden, who has been great value at times, and I still think has been a really good pick, has given us some underwhelming scores based on his capacity. Just ask Josh Dunkley owners last week. The ups and downs are there. Tom Green has delivered it. Rosie and Butters have dished up more than their fair share. Jordan Dawson.
The one guy, I reckon, that you could crown as the mid of the year would be Treloar. His floor has been great, and he's only dropped under 90 once or twice. Anyway, we've got a forward. We've got forwards to talk about.
We do. Throw out that injury week, and it's okay. All right, forwards.
Yep.
Who's that? Yeah, could you tell I was going to trade into him that week? Not bitter. I'm okay. If you're trading into any forward this week, who have you got and why? I think I know where you're going on this. The artwork of this episode might give it a little bit away, but
Oh, yeah.
I think I know where you're going. And if it's not, I'll go and talk about him anyway.
It's got to be Philippou for me.
It does.
Look, let's just have a look and talk about what this guy's done since he got the role change. So he had the role change. He's played 3 games in that role. He's averaging 102 in this new role. But look at who he did it against, MJ. The first week was against Sydney, so the Swans midfield, and that was his biggest score, and that was when they upset him. The next week was against Adelaide. Not too hard to score well against the Crows, but it was very wet, very dewy, very, very tough conditions. That goal he kicked from 50, 60 out was incredible. And then last week, he did it in essentially a 100-point drubbing to the Lions midfield. So this is what he's doing in those matchups. Now he's got Richmond, Geelong, Carlton. We have only just scratched the surface of this kid. So I reckon he could be really good for the next few weeks. And the funny thing is, he's probably the cheapest of all the viable options.
It's wild, isn't it? There's a really weird part to me that's hoping for some 80s. Just because I want him cheaper for next year. Look, he's already going to be great value for us next year. And I think he's going to maintain forward status. We'll talk about the Black Bookers in a second. But to me, I just go, just a couple more 80s. Just keep that average nice and under 70, please, Mateus. We'd really appreciate it for 2025. Those charging towards league and cash leagues or rankings are like, now. We want it now.
MJ, the cheaper he is, the more commonly owned he'll be. I don't mind his average going up because then there'll be less starting with him next year.
You want him in no man's land where he's kind of stuck in the 70 averages and people are umming and ahhing. I think given the forwards we might have, barring a few people changing teams next year, we might all be going for Mateus anyway, even if he lands in the 70s. I think that's a fair shout. I'm not going to cop out again. I've already done that now. On both rucks. So, because Philippou, I think, is right. I think if you already have the top 4 forwards, he's the guy. Simpkin, I don't mind, but are you really picking Jai over Philippou at that price point? Probably not. Let's go full just Hail Mary. Elijah Hollands is who I've got. I just think he could be something Elijah. He hasn't had any massive tons. I'm having allergic reactions for Jordox. If you're watching the video, you've seen exactly what he thinks about that decision. At all, just allergic to Carlton players.
Just a sneeze.
Yeah, sure it was. To be fair, again, can you pick Hollands over Philippou? Absolutely not. But Eagles and Saints in the final 2. Favourable matchups for wingers. Venues are there. They're going to be pushing hard to not just give themselves a chance at top 4, which they could, but to even hold a spot in the 8. Like, really, if they lose this week to Hawthorn, they are doing something that a month ago would have been laughed at, which is their finals chances are in jeopardy. They could become ninth for us again, which is just wild of what could happen. But if you're already a Philippou owner and you're like, I need something spicy in my forward line, I don't mind what Elijah could do in the last 3 weeks for us. There's not a huge shown ceiling, but all it takes is Carlton to just control that ball out on one of those wings and flanks for him, and it could go okay. I'd pick Philippou, but I can't have that many cop-outs, so I had to pick another one. So, Elijah, come on down.
Like it.
Before we wrap up the episode, let's talk about a Black Booker. 2025... while for some coaches, they're like, nah, MJ, Jordox, shut up. We've still got 3 weeks to go. That's okay. You can come back to this episode and check it out. Or for those that are just, they like fantasy content, but they don't really care about how their year's gone, just open up a little new note tab on your phone or wherever it is that you keep your little details for 2025. Is there a person or a player, there's probably 50 to be fair. Yes, I like the number 50. Who have you got? Just give us one black booker, someone that you'd go, just pencil him in, keep an eye on him. Variables could change, but who's on your black book for 2025?
I'm going to give you two, even though you said give me one. But before I do, I think the black book idea is, I'll be honest, I've seen it before, or I've heard people saying, "Oh, black book for next year," and I've kind of thought, what are you worrying about next year for? Don't, that's so far away. I actually think if you're a nut who watches a lot of footy, and I think most of us are, this is actually the perfect time to be taking notes of players, because come January, February, we're going to be looking at what, MJ? Stats to tell us a story. You've got an opportunity in these last few weeks, your season may be cooked, to watch the game and look for those guys who are going to take the next step next year, because the stats won't tell you necessarily. Sometimes it's the eye test. So in that vein, a guy whose stats will tell the story is an obvious one, but Matt Roberts for Sydney has just emerged in the last few weeks in a very nice role, and he'll be priced probably awkwardly next year, which is, again, what I like. So I'm not sure exactly what his role's been, but I assume he's just taking over from where Jake Lloyd left off 2-3 years ago and playing that role really well. So he's one. I did write out a huge list, but I'll leave that for now. I'll just add a guy. The only reason I want to do two is because you just mentioned him, but Elijah Hollands is actually a great guy for next year. Mm-hmm. He's 22 years old. He'll be a second year at his new club. Yeah. And this year he's just given 80s and 90s. I reckon next year we could see the next step. The only query will be that forward status, because if he doesn't have that, see you later.
Yeah, that could make it very, very interesting very, very quickly. I think that's a fair shout. While we're talking about two, I'll go one that's pushing premium territory, and then one that shouldn't be forgotten, but we do forget these cash cows very, very easily. Let's go at the top of the tree. He's a guy that I'm really comfortable to say that I can safely bank him on a 105 guy every single week, and he'll be priced at 10 points per game cheaper than that. And I'm talking about Tim Taranto. He'll be priced at a mid-90s. The maximum amount of games he'll be available to play this year is 15. So obviously AFL Fantasy gives you a percentage discount based on the number of games you miss. So that variable could move a little bit, but it's always off the higher of the two seasons. So we want him to play more because he's averaged less this year. We don't want him getting priced off that 110 sort of average, 105 average of last year. But to me, I look at this Richmond midfield. Prestia's a shell of himself. I think he's got maybe 1 year. Dustin Martin, an absolute legend, and definitely the greatest Tiger to ever play the game. And that's no shame to a Richardson or a Bartlett. It's just, they don't win 3 flags without Dusty. He is a legend. So I look at that midfield, and yeah, Hopper's solid, but Taranto's their guy. Yes, they're going to get an influx of kids through the draft, but to me, I think there's 10 points of value if he's priced in around that 95 sort of average, which he is right now. To me, he's that perfect starting squad option where he's just that little bit under that 900K range where you go, I'm getting myself an M2 and M3, but feel like I could be getting an M1. So to me, I'd put Timmy Taranto very, very happily in that spot and shown that he can score under this Uze game style too, which is important. The other, right at the opposite end of the tree, is a cash cow that to date has played nearly a handful of games, but hasn't played a full game of AFL yet. Talking about Dan Curtin, this is the exact type of cash cow that I would be looking for, because who do you want as a cash cow? Do you want someone that's only ventured into the AFL system, that you're playing 297K, 295K, 280K, that has only been in the AFL system for 3 months? Or do you want someone that's spent a full 12 months on top of that in the AFL system? Unless he gets some full games and pops some big scores, he's going to be under 250K for us next year. And to me, I look at a Curtin, if he works on the things that he's meant to, there's still opportunities and spots in that Crows midfield and defensive line for him. So if he stays under 250K, which I think they're happy to keep him a sub, that puts him right in that sweet spot, bargain spot to me. So just mark Dan Curtin away at the opposite end of the train as a potential cash cow. I like getting the second-year cash cows that are cheap. We might get a couple more, Clay Hall, Cleary, a couple more, but that we won't drop too many more.
If there's anything good to come out of this horrendous sub rule, it is those cheaper cash cows who have a year in the system. So I like it.
It's
in
true.
fact, I'll go as
Let's
far
hope
as
we don't
saying,
have them next year.
If he has a big off season, he'll make your top 50 most relevant, I reckon, Curtin.
Ooh. I may have started just building a little document on that while we're working on the top 50 keeper prospects.
I'm sure you would have. Actually, just on that top 50 keeper, I know I've told you this off air, but the top 50 keeper, for anyone who plays keeper, that is a brilliant series. I love it. Look forward to it every year. So looking forward to seeing where you put the X-Man, because I reckon he's become a top 5 starting pick selection.
So a tier 1 option. Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. Well, there you go. So if you play keepers, it's worth it. And even if it's not, obviously it supports the coaches panel, but it does give some early indicators of some players that myself and Kane are very, very strong on emerging for that coming season. So it's the players we think are the most valuable prospects to own for a keeper league, and we break them down generally into 8 tiers. Or we might maybe break the rules this year. We'll see how we go. But that series will drop for Patreons and Spotify subscribers only in October and November. September will be covered with footy finals. Then, of course, we start talking about the trade and the draft movements. Every player that is moving clubs in the trade and free agency, we do a video on our YouTube channel, so you can go and check that out. Then we hit the keeper ranks, and all of a sudden December, pretty much within the first week of December. I know it's crazy to think about in early August, but the positions land for a whole new season and we do this whole crazy thing again. But before we get there, there's 3 important weeks to go. Hey, Jordox, we thank you for your time on this episode yet again. And where can people get in touch with you across social media if they haven't done so already?
I'm on X at Jordox 2020. And also do yourself a favour and follow at AFL Subs on X as well. So we've set up an account that shoots out the subs and any late changes. And if you set notifications on, you don't even have to open up Twitter. It'll just buzz straight to your phone an hour before the game, so you can have some of your weekend back. Just a little bit, not too much, because we know if you want to be competitive this game, you can't have any weekends.
No, it's true. And the good thing is they don't post anything other than that. And so literally you're not going to get bombarded with every other post that rolls. It's literally as the weekend is, that's all it is. And let's hope it is a resource and a service that has only 3 more weeks of service to us. I would love nothing more than to bury that service, not just for the time it takes you and the team behind it, but also it means we're done with the sub. That would be fantastic. If you haven't checked us out across any of the podcast platforms, you can go and check us out. Make sure you've subscribed, followed, and given a 5-star rating and review. Every single episode we do here has also got an accompanying video. So you can go and check it out. You can say hello. Subscribe if you haven't. And if you watch, who are you trading into this week? Is it any of the hot players that we've alluded to? Maybe you're jumping off some of the cold options. Let us know in the comments section below. And you can join our Patreon supporter group, whether it be because you want to get that keeper rankings, you want to get some other exclusive podcasts and content and conversations that happen, or you just want to support the coaches panel. All the details for that and everything else you could possibly dream of from the coaches panel is in the description of this episode. Hey, thank you so much for watching and for listening. We wish you the best in these now 3 final weeks of your AFL fantasy season. Let's hope the trades you make, the luxury moves you make, all just fantastically land your way. Wouldn't that be nice for a change? And that your VC pops a monster early in the round so you're not stuck wondering who you dropped the C on a Sunday afternoon. Good luck from all of us here at the Coaches Panel. We wish you well, and we'll chat to you soon.